Nanette, big march up in Sacramento, thousands of students out there. What exactly were they demanding or hoping for?
Well, you know, I've been to a lot of protests, and every year tens of thousands really go up and demand a cut to that the state stop cutting. But this year was really different because they were so focused. The students knew that they wanted the millionaire's tax, which is earmarked for education. They were for it. They are against cuts to the Cal Grant, and they want an oil extraction tax. So they were very focused this year. And another thing that really made this year's protest different was the Occupy movement. Once the outside protests were all gone and the buses took many students home, others stormed into the Capitol. And it was pretty much the strangest thing I've ever seen to see pretty much dozens of students roaming around the halls and dancing in the rotunda, the ornate rotunda. There were students who were climbing on this 100-year-old marble statue of a queen, and then you had the CHP officers just sort of like, you know, very stoic, standing around, allowing them to do this until the Capitol closed and the arrests began.
So did they hear anything or hear from anyone that would indicate to them that they were heard by the right people?
Yeah. You know, it's funny, the student protests really do seem to get heard. They don't get everything they want. Tuition keeps rising. But for instance, this week, a very influential panel of the Assembly Budget Finance Committee, they decided pretty much that the Cal Grant cuts are dead in the water. Jerry Brown wants to cut Cal Grants to help solve this $9 billion budget gap that we have. And he thought he would do it by, you know, an easy $300 million cutting Cal Grants. This Assembly panel said, no, you will not do that, and they're not for it. It doesn't play well, and that's pretty dead in the water.
So Jerry isn't. I mean, I remember when he was like the youngest governor
ever. We're talking about the governor here.
Yeah,
right.
Jerry Brown.
Jerry.
So okay, Jerry Brown, you know, I guess likes to portray himself as a friend of public education, and in fact, he does have a tax proposal that he says would help education among other stress programs. But Brown does not seem to be beloved among the students there, and I guess they took issue with his initiative, his proposed initiatives. That's a rival of the proposed millionaire's tax.
Well, some of the students said, you know, okay, so there's a few tax proposals that are not yet made on the ballot, but the students want the millionaire's tax, and Jerry Brown wants a broader tax increase that would expire after 5 years. And if you ask the students what they think about the Brown tax, a number of them will say, what Brown tax? Because the millionaire tax has a very catchy name. You know, tax the millionaires. It's fabulous, and it plays well, and it does well in the polls. Jerry Brown's tax is sort of seen as an opposition to what the students want. So the students are not for that. It
includes a rather large sales tax, or substantial sales tax increase, too.
Just a quick interpretation, the millionaire's tax.
Okay. So what the students want is to have it would not expire, and it's a tax on the income tax of those earning more than $1 million in California. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, pretty sexy. Governor Brown would have a half-cent sales tax imposed, and then those earning, I believe, $250,000 a year or more would have their income tax increased. And that would expire after 5 years. And the benefit that Brown sees is that he would get to spend this revenue to solve the state's budget problem in a variety of areas. It would not just be earmarked for education. The millionaire's tax would be not only education, a few other programs, but largely for education.
They may both end up getting on the ballot, and maybe an oil extraction tax and this other tax by Molly Munger, the millionaire that would tax everybody's income. Do we have any sense of what leverage at all he has over the teachers' unions and the students to keep the millionaire's tax off the ballot? Because he clearly believes that if they're both on the ballot, or more than one is on the ballot, if more than three are on the ballot, they'll all go down.
Right.
But what power does he have to get the side that supports the millionaire's tax to drop their efforts?
Well, he's got a powerful argument. Whether it will wash, we don't know. What he's saying is that if his tax initiative does not pass, then there will be a series of trigger cuts to higher education and other services that would be devastating. Mm-hmm. We saw them already in 2011, and higher education suffered, mid-year tax cuts, and he's saying the same thing would happen if his tax does not pass. So it's a powerful argument.
Do you think the students trust the governor that if his tax passed, that they will be treated more generously by the way he divide whatever money comes in?
Not from what I've heard. You know, these are all very nuanced arguments, and right now the students are hearing what they want to hear, which is, you know, you're for us or you're against us. You want to cut Cal grants? Well, that's our, you know, ticket into higher education, and if you cut that, you're a bad guy. So that's how things are playing out right now in this sort of protest-happy environment.
But it's a great question, because there are a lot of other concerns in the state. The state has a $9 billion deficit. We've cut money for the blind, the disabled. We've cut money for, you know, we're closing a quarter of the state park system. There are a lot of other needs in the state, and there is no guarantee that if Brown's tax is the only one that passed, that the students would get all the money they want. I mean, some people look at that and say, look, a lot of these folks are middle class, and they should pay more if the state is suffering, and we should give more of the money to the poorest. Right, the blind, the elderly, the disabled, and I don't know that anything Jerry Brown says will satisfy each individual group who wants the money for their own thing.
Well, we'll turn to Bob, where there's another issue that I'm sure is going to be debatable, and that is the right of prisoners or ex-felons to vote.
Yes, this has to do with another Jerry Brown plan that is in effect now, called realignment, and, you know, frequently talked about. But what it has basically done is take people considered low-level felons, not convicted of violent crimes, nor serious, nor sex crimes, you know, drug possession and a variety of other things, and sentence them to county jail instead of state prison, and when they are paroled from state prison for these same crimes, put them under county supervision rather than state parole. This was in response to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that said that the state has to lower their prison population, the overcrowded prisons, by more than 30,000 in 2 years to make conditions possible so that the health care in prison will meet constitutional standards. That was realignment. The lawsuit filed by the ACLU and others on behalf of the League of Women Voters and some prisoners' rights groups says these former prisoners who are being realigned, sent to county custody, no longer should have the disabilities that we assign to people who are, quote, imprisoned or on state parole. And that's the definition in the state constitution approved by the voters. If you're imprisoned or on state parole, you can't vote in California. But if you're not, if you're in county custody, you do. And the thinking is, not only did we, you know, change the beds and change the addresses of these people, we changed their status. We are putting them back into the community for better or for worse, and they should regain their voting rights. Now, Secretary of State Debra Bowen, the top elections official and a Democrat, found to the contrary in an opinion in December that she sent out to all the county registrars. She said these people, they may be in county jail, and there's going to be upwards of 85,000 of them as of June 2013, but they're still serving felony time. They're still doing the equivalent of parole, and that they do not have voting rights. So the lawsuit before a state court of appeal said, you know, voting rights are supposed to be interpreted broadly. The franchise is important to people being integrated back into the community. These folks should have the right to vote, and they're going to leave it up to the courts.
Isn't there another element to this too, and that is the makeup of the prison population that we're talking about? Large numbers of minorities. Yeah,
and it's certainly one argument that is made, you know, not just here, but in voting rights cases in general, and in felony disenfranchisement in general, which is pretty much nationwide. Maine and Vermont are the only two states that allow imprisoned felons to vote, but it is heavily, disproportionately minority, and that's one reason that the lawsuit says these laws, these felony disenfranchisement laws, should not be interpreted broadly, or to put it another way, that voting rights should get the benefit of the doubt. If there's some question about the status of these people, they should have the right to vote, because that's a democratic value. It's a strong argument. Whether it sells with the courts, I don't know. I doubt it would sell with the public.
Let me ask you this, Bob, because you know, California has one of the lowest voter turnouts in the country. So, are felons, convicted felons, really clamoring for the right to vote? And who's really behind this? Are they just, you know, demanding the right to vote suddenly?
Hard to say, although two of the plaintiff groups are prisoners' rights groups. Mm-hmm. It's families of prisoners with children, and a group called All of Us or None, in addition to the League of Women Voters. So there's some advocacy on behalf of at least former prisoners. But some of the voices that you hear are like from people in reentry programs, people trying to reintegrate people into the community, and they say voting is part of community membership. And it's one way to tell people, you know, you're a citizen again. You have a stake. You have a voice. You know, you maybe have a route to power. And you know, there's a different context here too. Nationwide, 30 states now have voter ID laws, mostly Republican-sponsored, and they tend to limit the ability to go to the polls, particularly, again, with the elderly, with minorities, with people who are less likely to have photo IDs. There is this national campaign going on, and a pushback from some Democrats as well.
But there are a number of issues that are going to be before voters too this November. We'll be voting about the death penalty.
Yes, we
we'll
will.
be talking about 3 strikes, whether some people should be resentenced in a different way. All of these issues about prisoners and their rights coming at one time, how do you think that is going to play out in public discourse in an election year?
I don't think that that prisoners' rights would pass in too many elections. I mean, look at the record on crime initiatives. Almost all of them pass. It'd be interesting to me to see if there is any more support for repeal of the death penalty than there has been in the past. It doesn't seem to be the way it polls. But of course, that's why the ACLU and League of Women Voters has gone to the court and not the ballot box. And it's interesting to me too that you know, the Debra Bowen, the Democratic Secretary of State, you know, took the opposite position. It could be that she's right or arguable on the law, but she didn't take the position to expand voting rights here. It doesn't seem to be an issue that Democrats are coming out in front on to be advocates for felons. I mean, you know, it's not a very popular constituency.
So quickly, where is this in court, and when do we hear about it next?
It was filed with the State Court of Appeal in San Francisco, a court that potentially can issue a statewide ruling, and they're asking them to, you know, do something quickly so these folks can vote in the 2012 election.
All right.